Welcome back, Whisky fans, and before we get too carried away with things, I'd like to give a thank you to Miles on the Corner, who is probably been with me longer than anyone else, right back since the very early days, for giving me the recommendation to try this one, because this is Cutty Sark Prohibition Edition, and I'm very familiar with the Cutty Sark standard blended Scotch, and it's not amazing, so probably like a lot of people, I didn't try this one for a very long time, but it is absolutely worth trying. So before anything else, a little bit of history on why this whisky is called Cutty Sark and why it's called Prohibition Edition. The Cutty Sark, for anyone that doesn't know, was, and still is, a British tea clipper. So it's a fast wooden sail ship, and I think that the Cutty Sark has become famous probably for two reasons. One, that back in the day it was renowned for being the fastest of all the tea clippers, and secondly because it's still there. If you go down to, I think it's Greenwich in London, you can actually pay to go around it. It's in permanent dry dock at the moment, and you can actually go on the ship and have a look around, and it's well worth doing if you're in London. I do think that a lot of the reason why the Cutty Sark is so famous these days is kind of down to circumstance though, because the Cutty Sark actually came in the ship at the end of the sort of the golden age of sail, when steamships were starting to creep in and take over from sail ships. So a combination of the improving steamships available and the Suez Canal meant that the Cutty Sark, even though it was sort of the leader in its class in the day, it actually wasn't used as a tea clipper for that long. And after a couple of decades of being the top ranking tea clipper, it was kind of relegated to a service running down to Australia and back to the UK. And then sadly, as steamships became even better, it was kind of relegated even from that role, and it was sold on to the Portuguese and then sold back to the English to be used as a training ship. So you could say that whatever the opposite of ahead of its time is, that's what the Cutty Sark was, but still a beloved British icon. So that's the ship that Cutty Sark whisky is named after. So why is this Cutty Sark in the dark glass bottle named Prohibition Edition? Obviously Prohibition was when they banned alcohol in America in the early 20th century. So what does a 19th century British sailing ship have to do with American Prohibition? Well, the answer to that is probably nothing at all. The connection between Cutty Sark and American Prohibition is that Cutty Sark whisky was actually smuggled from the UK into America during Prohibition. And you might not be able to see this, but in the top of the glass they've actually moulded the real McCoy just on the shoulder of the bottle. You probably can't see that. But the reason why they've done that is to commemorate a particular captain. I believe it's Captain William McCoy, who was a notorious smuggler of whisky into the United States during Prohibition, which also makes a lot more sense when you consider that on the front of the bottle of this, it is a blended Scotch whisky. It's not a blended malt, so it's at least one single malt and at least one grain whisky. In reality, probably quite a few single malts and probably one grain whisky, maybe two. But on the label it says handcrafted from grain and malt whiskies matured in American oak, so probably bourbon casks, and bottled at 100 proof, and in brackets it says USA measure. Now, it's very unusual for Scotch whisky to be sold in the UK to be measured in the US proof system. In the UK we have our older original proof system, which is based on 7 quarters, or roughly equivalent to 7 quarters of alcohol by volume. So 100 UK proof is around 57.14% ABV, but on this one they've bottled it at 50% ABV, which is 100 proof US, because US proof is just ABV times 2. And it's obviously because of that US Prohibition connection that they've gone with that US proof. Other details that we've got for this one, it's 50% ABV, it's non-chill filtered, which is amazing for a blended whisky of this price level, because this stuff sells for about £23 here in the UK. So it's actually one of the cheapest whiskies that I've ever reviewed. It's one of the cheapest whiskies that you can buy unless you're going for proper bottom shelf stuff. It's really cheap. And when you consider that it doesn't say if it's natural colour, but it does say that it's non-chill filtered and it's 50%. The fact that this is only £23 kind of makes it seem like the bargain of the century. Although maybe not, because the original Cutty Sark whisky is not great. And I have got my tasting notes from the last time I tried the original Cutty Sark here. I'll just read out the highlights here from... This isn't for this is for the 40% Cutty Sark, which, I'll be perfectly honest, I can't be bothered to review because it's not that good and I don't want to buy it. So, Cutty Sark 40%, on the nose, smooth neutral grain, lemon, cornflakes, malt. On the palate, smooth sweet lemon, mineral, marshmallow, slightly tannic and bitter. Yeah, basically quite neutral. Vanilla, a little bit, or quite a lot young. Light, neutral, sharp. Not the worst, but it's not great. So anyway, let's get some of the Prohibition edition in the glass and see if it's any better. Really tight cork. Look at the shape of that cork. I don't know what's going on with that. But it does the job. It definitely performs an adequate seal. So as for colouring on this one, yeah, it's got some caramel colouring in there. They've not gone overboard. See what I did there? It's not White and Mackay territory, White and Mackay, but it's pretty dark for what you would assume is going to be, I don't know, 3-5 years old, something like that. So not natural colour, but it is non-chill filtered and it is a very good drinking strength. So Cutty Sark Prohibition Edition on the nose. Punchy. Lots of character, lots of power to this one. Also lots of sweet, creamy grain notes. You can tell that this is not a blended malt. There's definitely grain whiskey gone into there, but it's good grain and it works really well. Also a slight starchiness to the nose of this one, which possibly betrays that it is a young whiskey, but again, not a huge problem. You can also tell that they have used that American oak on this one. You can tell that there's been bourbon casks in this. So I'm getting lots of sweet vanilla. It's a little bit of a vanilla bomb, which you would probably expect from a young whiskey with grain whiskey in there matured in those bourbon casks. There's also a pleasant salty salinity to this whiskey, a nice brininess, a little bit of a callback to the Cutty Sark there. But something that I really like about this one, something that adds a lot of character to this one, is that there's lots of black pepperiness, lots of peppery, and I imagine it's probably coming through from some of those oak casks. Maybe some fresher oak casks have been used in this one. I do like that black peppery note on this. Also getting some pleasant butterscotch on the nose and quite a bit of peat. Surprising amount of peat for such an affordable young blended Scotch. Normally when you talk about peated budget blended Scotch, even something like Johnnie Walker Black Label, which in my opinion is not cheap anymore and it's not that good. You look at the amount of peat in Johnnie Walker Black Label and it's nowhere near as peated as even a lot of lightly peated single malt, but this one there's a reasonable amount of peat in there. And it's a very characterful, oily, tarry peat. And even more character than that, I think there's something in there that seems a little bit sulphury to me. It might just be the pepperiness combined with that smoky peat, but I'm getting a little hint of struck matches on the nose of this one, as well as a very pleasant orangey tangerine note. So, young whiskey, young and ballsy, but really fun, really interesting, and really good. Let's see how it tastes. So on the palate, as you would expect from that 50% and non-chill filtered, really ballsy, lots of flavour, really punchy, quite aggressive and assertive. It's young whiskey done well. On the palate I'm getting tangerine and condensed milk, well, that lovely creamy, milky vanilla note coming back again. Again, slightly salty, and that wonderful creamy, slightly peppery smokiness coming back in. I'm getting a little bit of a note of butyric on the palate of this one, so that creaminess edging towards a slightly off milk, off dairy note. More black pepper, as well as a really nice maltiness. I'd say that with this one on the palate, it seems much less grainy, and it seems like it has a much higher malt content when you taste this compared to the impression that you get on the nose. Going to have one more sip and look at the finish. I must admit, I try not to give judgment on a whiskey when I'm still doing the tasting notes, but I really enjoy this whiskey. If you can put your prejudice aside, this is a cracking, fun little dram. As for the finish though, shortish, shorter than you would like, and quite light, but with a pleasant touch of that smoky, peppery malt. And importantly, I think that from the palate and the finish, I would say that the malt content of this is probably much higher than what you get on the standard 40% cutty. So, it's obviously a little bit unfair to compare a £23, it sounds ridiculous to say, but this is a £23 bottle of Scotch whisky to something like Lagavulin. But that oily, tarry peat note, it does remind me of a young Lagavulin a little bit. And it must be said that this is something that I think personally, that creamy black pepper note that you get all the way through this really reminds me of Glen Scotia. That creaminess with that butyric note really makes this quite a dairy-ish whiskey. I don't know if there is any Glen Scotia goes into this, I haven't done any detective work, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if there's Glen Scotia single malt in this. With that pepperiness and that coastal salinity, it's also quite Talisker-ish at times, but thankfully with more power. Has to be pointed out, and quite rightly so, that this is a very young whiskey, and it tastes young, but it's really young whiskey that plays to its strengths rather than accepting its shortcomings. It's young whiskey done well. So, Cutty Sark Prohibition Edition, is it good value? Absolutely. It absolutely is an exceptionally good value, young, enjoyable, fun whiskey. And to be honest, if this whiskey wasn't even as good as it is, the presentation alone and its benefits on the intensity and mouthfeel alone kind of make this worth £23. I would really love to see more whiskey like this. I hope that this one stays available for a while, because I will 100% be buying at least another one bottle of this. It's just well-made whiskey, honestly presented, and sensibly priced. I think that it puts almost all other blends to shame, and it puts almost everything else to shame in terms of price. It just makes you ask the question, if they can make this stuff at 50% ABV and non-chill filtered and sell it for £23 and still make a profit, why can't everyone else? So one answer to that is because this stuff is young. Potentially 3 years and a day, it doesn't taste old. It is a young whiskey. But if that's the case, then everyone else who's making their older whiskey, add £10 to the price. Why can't everyone else give us 50% and non-chill filtered for £33? Or even £43? Realistically, the answer is probably because they're greedy. And we should probably all, myself included, stop encouraging it and stop allowing it. Spend your money wisely, reward the companies who offer you good value for money, and those companies that don't want to offer you good value for money, let it stay on the shelf. So I was really, really pleasantly surprised with this one, so much so that I'll definitely be buying more. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about this one if you've tried it. And what do you think about the price? Because this just seems insanely good value to me. Thanks for watching, and cheers.